People mess up, soldiers mess up, but sometimes those mess ups can result in someone getting kicked out of the Army. What's up, my friends? U.S. Army veteran Christopher Chaos, and we're here to talk about the 3 most common things that if a soldier does get kicked out of the Army, it may be one of these 3. These are usually the most common kinds of things that soldiers do get kicked out of the Army for, but also talk about some other things that way you know definitely what not to do if you really need that kind of knowledge. Because I feel like you shouldn't be told don't do dumb stuff because it should be self-explanatory, but sometimes people need that stuff, or you're probably just curious, right? You're probably curious as to what are some things that people sometimes get kicked out of the Army for. That's the type of thing I like to do here on this channel, on the Christopher Chaos channel. I like to educate you about the U.S. Army. I got a whole bunch of other videos to educate you about the Army, from basic training all the way to while you're in the Army and a bunch of other stuff. So if that's the type of content you're interested in, make sure you are subscribed to this channel. Also click on that bell with all notifications so you get alerts as soon as new videos go live, to include the live streams. That way you can join in on all the fun action and be a part of that notification platoon. So let's talk about some of these 3 most common things. Now, I say 3 most common things, not that getting kicked out of the Army is a common thing, but usually when it does happen, these are usually some of the factors or the reasons that I often see that soldiers got kicked out of the Army for. First one, which is actually probably the most common of people that are usually getting kicked out of the Army, that's for failing a drug test. Soldiers have to do drug tests often, actually, very, very often sometimes. Sometimes you might do one every other week or every week or whatever the case is. Sometimes you might want to do one every couple of months or whatever the case is. Sometimes it definitely varies. This is also mainly talking about active duty, right? Reserves, National Guard, that's definitely a whole different ballpark. But for your active duty soldiers, right, you are probably doing your analysis, you are doing the drug tests often as hell. Typically, this comes from the company commander or whoever up higher wanting to do like a 10% or 100% or whatever the case is for the company. Now, if a leadership individual, suspects that a soldier is, possibly using, then they can request that one individual to do a drug test, but sometimes that might be a little difficult as they need some kind of evidence, some kind of probable cause to have that soldier tested. But you don't need probable cause or any kind of special evidence to say that, hey, we're gonna do 100% for the company to make sure nobody in the company is doing drugs, and then potentially from that, catch that one person that you're suspicious of. So sometimes that can happen. If they have some kind of information they're hearing from soldiers where they're thinking that these soldiers are maybe on drugs or whatever the case is, then sure, they might do a whole company-wide urinalysis. Now, this isn't always a situation where you get kicked out of the Army for it. This is more common since 2015, where it is pretty common that soldiers, if they fail a drug test, could have a much higher chance of getting kicked out of the Army, but still not 100% guaranteed chance that they will get kicked out of the Army. Earlier in the early 2000s, right, of like 2005, whatever, 2010, then it might have been more along the lines of an Article 15, right? You're gonna get reduced in rank, maybe all the way back to an E1, especially like you're an E4, come up hot on a drug test, you're going all the way down to E1, reduced in pay, extra duty, all the 9 yards. 2015, they really started cracking down on some of this stuff like that. So it became a lot more common that if you failed a drug test, they were having zero tolerance for that stuff anymore. And they were just chaptering that soldier out of the Army, getting kicked out. So no, it's not 100% guaranteed that if someone comes up hot for a drug test that they are going to be kicked out of the Army, but the chances are much higher, especially since 2015. A soldier now, if it was something that, was of no wrongdoing, it was a false report, false test, whatever the case was, then they can appeal it, right? But if they, lose the appeal, they have no way of proving that, the test was wrong, or they take another test and it failed that one too, then there's nothing you can do, and you're getting probably either kicked out of the Army, or maybe you're lucky and you only just get reduced in rank. The second most common situation that you might see of why a soldier maybe got kicked out of the Army is a DUI. If a soldier goes out, goes partying, maybe they get pulled over off post, they get a DUI. Sometimes the local authorities will turn that over to the military authorities, and sometimes that still results in some kind of things, some kind of punishment where they're gonna probably lose their license or whatever the case would be. And potentially this one can result in getting kicked out of the Army. Same kind of lines like I was talking about with the drug test, right? I remember back in the 2005, 2010 era type of thing, if a soldier got a DUI, they're probably losing all their rank, right? They're probably gonna be sucking in life because now they're going back down to a private. Or if they're an NCO, they can drop down one rank, as you can't take an NCO from like E6 all the way down to E1, but you can take it from an E6 down to an E5 and make them do extra duty and reduce their pay. But this one, kind of like I talked about with the drug one, has gotten a lot stricter since 2015, where they are cracking down, and sometimes this can result in soldiers getting kicked out of the Army for this kind of a thing. So just like with the drug one, not 100% guaranteed, but nowadays Army kind of a thing, there's a much higher chance than it used to be back in the 90s, the early 2000s, that kind of time period, as far as whether you're gonna get kicked out or just get Article 15, chances now are a lot higher that you probably possibly could potentially get kicked out of the Army for getting a DUI. Now, the third most common thing that I have seen of soldiers getting kicked out of the Army and why they got kicked out of the Army, this one being a much more serious one, and that is domestic violence. This one is 99.9, if not 100% chance that if you commit domestic violence, you are getting kicked out of the Army because of the Lautenberg Amendment. The Lautenberg Amendment makes it to where anybody who is convicted of this type of thing, of domestic violence, is not allowed to own or operate a firearm. That makes you useless in the Army. I've heard of some people saying, well, they could just put you in MOS where you don't use a weapon. They're not gonna do that. They're not gonna wanna tolerate that and kind of mess with that. I think there's only one MOS you can do that with, and that's a chaplain probably. So they're not gonna go and make you a chaplain because that's an officer also as well. So no, they are going to kick you out of the Army if you are convicted. If you are just accused of it, right, then that's not necessarily, gonna result in you getting kicked out until you are convicted. So if they have proven, and it is proven that you did commit domestic violence, then because of that Lautenberg Amendment, you're getting kicked out. In my time in the Army, I think I've heard of maybe like 1 or 2 soldiers ever, getting kicked out, at least just in my firsthand kind of experience type of thing. There's obviously maybe a larger number, I don't know what kind of number of percentage or how many soldiers were kicked out of the Army because of this one, but it's definitely not something like, oh, left and right, there's people, beating their spouses and getting kicked out of the Army. No, like my 10 years of being in the Army, I think didn't actually know anybody, but heard, oh, so-and-so from this company or this troop or whatever got kicked out of the Army because he got charged with domestic violence. So that one is, not a common one that I saw all the time. The ones that were the more common ones that I would see of people that I knew or, heard about a lot were because of, failing a drug test. Obviously, those are not the only things that can result in you getting kicked out of the Army. There is a ton of different things that can result in a soldier getting kicked out of the Army. Some examples of that is obviously like felonies, right? If you committed a murder, of course, you're going to jail and then you're getting kicked out of the Army as well. If you stole a car, you robbed someone, anything you can think of as a felony, rape, whatever, right? You are going to be kicked out of the Army if you are convicted of that crime. A couple other things that some people may not think of that could result in someone getting kicked out of the Army, but also could just simply result in Article 15, but one of them being adultery. In the civilian world, right, that may be something to, file for divorce for, maybe, win, a bunch of money from your spouse because they committed adultery from you, but is not against the law. It basically is against the law in the Army or in the military. So if you are found to be guilty of adultery, they can either choose to just give you an Article 15, reduce you in rank, all that kind of punishment, or if they want to, they can pursue it to the highest level and kick a soldier out of the military for committing adultery. That can come from that soldier being married and, cheating on their spouse, or even just, it can be a single soldier that has some kind of sexual relations with a married individual. And especially like if that ends up being the case where that soldier had sexual relations with a married individual that maybe their spouse was in the military or they're in the military, whatever the case was, and that, evidence got out, that, information got out, then they can still get in trouble too, even though that soldier was single, because they had sexual relations with someone who is married. So don't think you're safe just because you're single. It's not the thing. So make sure that if you're gonna have any kind of that relations with someone, make sure both of you are single. I've seen a couple of soldiers in this situation. Now, this was back in like around 2007, 2009-ish, somewhere around there, and those individuals got busted down in rank. They lost rank, they got Article 15s, all that kind of fun stuff, but if leadership wanted to push this to a higher level and kick a soldier out, they potentially could. I don't know how common that is for adultery, but that is an option that leadership can pursue. Another one, which is actually less common, but you can get kicked out of the Army for it, that is being overweight, failing to meet the weight standards for the United States Army. This one doesn't happen quite as often, right? You may have seen, like in videos, photos, whatever the case was, of soldiers look like they're overweight, and that may be the case, right? But I feel like all the experience I've ever seen, leadership gives those individuals a ton of chances, right? Maybe more chances than they should, I don't know, right? But they probably have the mindset of, do we need to ruin this soldier's career because they can't make weight, or should we give them some options and give them some chances, probably a lot of chances? Is that necessarily great for combat? Probably not, right? But sometimes, people are people, right? And they don't necessarily want to destroy someone's career over something like they eat too many cheeseburgers or whatever, even though that may make them not very combat effective, but they try to give them at least an opportunity. And if they are making some kind of efforts and maybe losing the weight, maybe not as fast as leadership would want them to, then maybe they allow them, multiple opportunities. If it's something where they are just blowing this off and they're gaining more weight, then sure, maybe they're like, screw this guy then, or girl, whatever the case is, we're gonna chapter this individual out. But that can be an option, right? That can be something that leadership pursues, is to chapter a soldier out because they can't meet weigh and tape, they can't meet the weight standards. But often I've seen it where soldiers get a lot of opportunities to try to improve, and as long as they're improving, then leadership continues to give more and more chances usually. That may vary though. I mean, sometimes there are some units that are getting pretty strict about this kind of a thing and may have lesser of a tolerance than other units might have, and they're like, nope, you're getting chapter out. Because I have heard of soldiers getting chapter out because they could not meet the weight standards. Some of those being within the last couple of years where I've talked to leadership and they're like, no, we've got a couple soldiers, they can't meet the weight standards, so we're starting the chapter paperwork and we're taking them out of the Army. So don't think that you're just going to have multiple chances. You might get lucky and get multiple chances, especially if you're making improvements with your leadership, but that's not a thing they have to give you. They could just say, screw it, we're chaptering this individual out because they can't meet the standards. Now, maybe some of my veterans out there, maybe some individuals that are currently in the Army, maybe let me know in the comment section. Have you heard about, soldiers getting kicked out of the Army? Have you known someone that got kicked out of the Army? If so, what was it for? Maybe we'll hear about some different kind of scenarios. Obviously don't, dox anybody's name or anything like that, but, maybe just a general story or maybe a brief story as far as why you've known people that have gotten kicked out of the Army for, or even the military, maybe for that matter. As I said earlier, take a look down below. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel. I have a goal in 2021 to reach 100,000 subscribers, and I can't do that without you guys' help. So help me out. Check out some other videos here. Maybe it might interest you that you haven't seen from me possibly. Links in the description down below for social media, a bunch of other fun stuff. So check those out down below. I'm Christopher Chaos. I'll see you next time. See ya.